Hello, dear viewers. Today we will dive into a story where reality is distorted and the past and present intertwine into a frightening cocktail. Our hero, waking up after a 10-year coma, discovers that his world has turned upside down. His name, his life, everything turned out to be not what it seemed. What is hidden behind this abyss of lies and betrayal? Who is behind his disappearance? And will he be able to restore his true identity? Get ready for shocking revelations, unexpected turns, and tense moments. Don't miss this exciting story in all its parts, just by subscribing to our channel, because YouTube cannot always give you the next part in the recommendations, and you will simply miss what will actually happen to our heroes. Crucial moment. Chapter 1. Time after time, he experienced the same thing, a bright flash of light, followed by searing pain and then darkness. Now and then he heard voices, but he couldn't make out who they were coming from or what they were saying. He tried to speak, but couldn't. He tried to move, but he couldn't. This time, however, the light was different. It was as if he were looking through a fog, but he couldn't make out anything and couldn't focus on anything. Shadowy figures floated in front of him, and he tried to call out, but he couldn't. He began to hear sounds, but nothing he heard made sense. He forced himself to move, but he couldn't. He tried to scream, but nothing came out. Exhausted, he stopped to rest, and darkness came over him again. After a while, he didn't know how much time had passed. The light returned. He forced himself to move, and finally he could, but it took all his strength. He tried to scream, but all that came out was a nauseating gurgle. He felt like there was something in his throat preventing him from speaking. A shadow moved in front of him, stopped for a moment, and then fled with a loud noise. He saw several more shadows, this time approaching and gathering around him. He blinked his eyes, hoping to clear his vision. The shadows moved quickly around him, doing something incomprehensible to him. Then he heard someone's voice. "Mr. Smith, can you hear me?" A male voice said. Who the hell is Mr. Smith? He wondered. Nevertheless, he heard him and tried to nod his head. It took a lot of effort, but he finally managed a faint nod. When his vision began to clear, he realized he was lying in a hospital bed, and the people around him, all in medical garb, were frantically trying to bring him back to consciousness. The man he mistook for a doctor said something about seeing if he could breathe on his own. Soon he felt a tape being removed from his face and something being pulled out of his throat. Gasping, he suddenly realized his throat wasn't constricted and took a few tentative breaths, enjoying the sensation of breathing in air on his own. All right, the man said. As he looked around, he saw many wires attached to his body, a blood pressure cuff on his upper arm, and an IV inserted in his lower arm. He could also feel the catheter. Glancing at the wall, he saw the thinnest television he had ever seen in his life, and noticed a chronogram at the bottom of the screen that said something about President Trump. Trump? He asked himself. How long had he been here? As far as he knew, Barack Obama had only been in the White House for a few months. How long? He asked weakly. The doctor looked at his thick chart before answering. As far as I can tell, about 10 years, Mr. Smith, he said. 10 years? What the hell had happened? And who was this Smith they were all referring to? He wondered. Just relax, Mr. Smith. We'll get you checked out and referred to rehab. While he watched, the nurses were removing his arms and legs from the restraints holding him to the bed, and the doctor was making adjustments to his notes. Before he spoke, he looked at another nurse. Do we have Mr. Smith's contact information? He asked. The young nurse looked into her computer and answered in the affirmative. Very well. Contact them and let them know. The nurse began to make the call, and the man wondered who was coming to see him. His memory was still a little hazy, but he remembered that he was married and had an 8-year-old daughter. My God, he thought, my daughter Jenny would be 18 by now, and she'd probably be ready to go to college. He thought of his wife, Lydia, but for some reason he didn't want to see her. Something about seeing his wife, he wasn't sure what it was, repulsed and angered him. Well, Mr. Smith, the doctor said, your vitals look good, but we're still going to run some tests. Once we get the results, we'll take the feeding tube out of you and take you to your room. You'll be our guest for a while, but then we'll get you to a rehab center and get you back on your feet, okay?" The man nodded. "Doctor," he said, "who is Smith?" The doctor looked at his notes and then back at him. "Yes, that's right," he said. "You seem to have amnesia. I'm not surprised, really. You've been through a lot. It's nothing to be alarmed about. We'll get someone in to work with you. For now, just relax and we'll work on your recovery." With those words, the doctor left, giving instructions to a few nurses along the way. The man knew who he was, and it wasn't this Smith. His name was Avery Wilson. He was born in 1972 to Dan and Barbara Wilson. He had a brother, Robert, who was a year older than him. At the age of 18, right out of high school, he went into the army and was trained as a sniper. He spent the next 4 years in various locations around the world, including Kuwait. He survived Desert Storm and finally got out of it in 1994 and returned home to Southern California, where he earned an associate degree in criminal justice in 1996. He always wanted to be a police officer, so he joined the LAPD, where his military training came in handy. After graduating from the police academy, he became a sniper in 1997. He met Lydia Jackson, and after 2 years of dating, married her in 1999. Everything was great, he thought, and they had a daughter, Jennifer, in October 2000. He stayed on as a police officer, and his wife worked as a solicitor in the same firm where his brother was a partner. In late 2008, he won a rather large sum of money in the lottery, and everything went downhill from then on. Around the time he won the lottery, he found out, quite by accident, that his wife was having a long-standing affair with his brother. Fortunately, his good friend and confidant Ben Jacobs talked him into opening an overseas account in another name so that Lydia couldn't access most of his lottery winnings. Ben, being an expert in financial matters, managed the account for him. He also set him up with a real shark, a lawyer who hated cheating spouses and hated Robert even more. He also set up surveillance on Lydia and Robert, and managed to get photos and videos of their dates. He had planned to tell his wife about her infidelity, but something happened. He didn't remember the details of that night, but he was sure he would soon remember everything. The next thing he remembered was waking up in that hospital room 10 years later. Exhausted, he rested his head back and watched TV while the nurses did their work. But who was this Smith? And what is this even about? He reflected on his life while watching the local news. According to the news, one Robert Wilson had declared himself a candidate for public office. He wondered if this Robert Wilson could be his brother. He watched a well-dressed man with gray hair on his temples address a group of people outside a building in downtown Los Angeles. Standing next to him were 2 women, Lydia and a teenage girl who looked like an adult version of his Jenny. "And I promise the people of this great state that I will bring ethics and accountability back to state government," Robert said to thunderous applause. "Sacramento is out of control, and we must get back to basics." Robert turned and kissed Lydia on the cheek. She was 2 years younger than Avery, and in his opinion, had the best looks money could buy. Wilson, joined by his wife and daughter, made his announcement this afternoon and is already ahead in the polls. Wilson has been working with the families of fallen police officers since the tragic death of his brother Avery in 2009, the newscaster said, showing a photo of him in a police uniform. "What the fuck?" thought the man, watching the report. "Death? I'm not dead, asshole," he said to himself. "And what's the story with Jenny? Robert's daughter?" He leaned his head back and tried to remember the last few days before he'd been in the hospital, but his mind was blank. He went over the major events of his life in his mind, hoping to find an answer. He thought of Robert, his older brother. For as long as he could remember, Robert had been the bane of his existence. Not only was he a bully, but he loved to take everything he could from his younger brother. Money, credits for everything he did, possessions, even girlfriends. It seemed that whatever he had, Robert wanted it whether he needed it or not. Worse, his parents agreed with everything Robert said or did, and if Robert did something wrong, he always got out of it in such a way that his parents ended up punishing his younger brother. He grew up hating his older brother, and the crap he put up with from his parents didn't help. Robert was the good son who had to do his own thing. and Avery remained the black sheep. It was so bad that he never told his family that he had enlisted in the army. He had just graduated from high school and was leaving for boot camp the next day. He signed his enlistment papers one day after graduation, passed all the physicals, and was ready to go. No one even knew where he was until he was forced to call home. "What did you do?" his father growled when he called out. "Get your ass home right now, young man." "Fuck you," Avery said. "I'm over 18 and I'm already in camp, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. Don't expect to hear from me again." And with those words, he slammed the phone down, ending the conversation. He kept his word and didn't speak to either of them until he graduated from the police academy in 1997. It wasn't his choice, by the way. They found out from the LAPD that he was graduating from the academy and showed up at his door. He never forgot that day. He noticed them as they stood in formation. After the speeches, they stood up to receive their certificates, and he saw them, including Robert, watching him become the newest officer on the force. After the ceremony, he tried to make a quick exit, but they stopped him, blocking his path. And they didn't look too happy about it. "You're not leaving us again, Avery," his father said. "I knew you'd finally accomplish something. I hoped you'd go to college and become a lawyer like me and my brother." Robert smirked, but the smirk quickly disappeared from his face. "Yeah, but it's my choice, and that asshole can't take it away from me," Avery said, glaring at Robert. "For your information, I accomplished something in the military." "Avery, please," his mother Barbara said. "We haven't seen or heard from you in 7 years. Could you be nice to us for once?" "Maybe if you and Dad had given me a chance just once, things would have been different. But no, you always listened to him, always took his side in everything, and never once gave me the time of day," he said. "This is my day, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let you ruin it for me." "Avery," Robert said, "I don't understand. Why do you hate me so much?" "Are you kidding me? You were a goddamn bully. You took everything I had, even my girlfriends," he said. "You blamed me for every shitty thing you did, and made them believe all your fucking lies," he added, pointing at his parents. His parents were shocked to hear him say those words. He was always so quiet, so polite. Who is this man in front of them, they wondered. "You know what, asshole? I'm done with you. I've paid my price, and I'm building my own life. So stay the fuck out of it," he told Robert, his eyes burning with hatred. "Avery, son, what happened to you?" his mother asked, shocked by her son's words. He was no longer the calm man who accepted everything he was told. He looked at his mother. "I grew up, Mom," he said. "I became a soldier, and you know what? I even sent a few souls to the other world." Hearing this, she backed off a little. He continued. "Don't worry, Mom. They were all bad guys and deserved it. I'm not the same person who grew up in your house anymore, and I don't hold a grudge against anyone." He looked at Robert before continuing. "Never." He turned and walked away from them, leaving them with their mouths hanging open. He didn't see them again until the day he married Lydia. He met her at a police event shortly after he became a cop. She was working in the public defender's office at the time, but was looking for a job at a large firm. He proposed to her a year ago when they met, and she accepted. They decided to have a long engagement to make sure it worked out, and they were married a year later. Divorces were fairly common among police officers. He didn't invite his family to the wedding, but they showed up anyway. He saw them during the reception when Lydia pointed them out. "Isn't that your family?" she asked, pointing to his parents and Robert. "Yes," he said. "I don't know why they're here." "You must introduce me, please," she begged. Avery gave in and walked his bride over to them. They smiled as Avery introduced his wife. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you," Father Avery said. "I don't understand, Avery. Why didn't we get an invitation to your wedding?" his mom asked. "Probably by oversight or something," Avery said. The truth was that he'd never invited them. "I hear you're joining our firm soon," Dan said. Avery looked shocked, and Lydia glared at him. "Oh, I'm sorry, Avery. Didn't you know? The board of directors just accepted her today." "No, I didn't know," Avery said, as Robert smirked. "I'm sorry, Avery. I didn't realize I'd been accepted until just now," Lydia said. Avery nodded his head. "It's all right, honey," he said. We'll talk about it later. Mind if I dance with my new sister-in-law? Asked Robert with a snide smirk. Avery pulled him aside and spoke to him in a low tone, so no one else could hear. Listen up, asshole, he said to his older brother. This isn't fucking high school. She's my wife, not some high school girl. I understand, Robert said condescendingly. Avery grabbed his shoulder. No, you don't. Do you know what I did in the army? Asked Avery. Robert shook his head. No. I suppose you were some sort of clerk, Robert said. No, I was a sniper. I stripped the souls of bastards like you for a living, and I could hit your balls from 1,000 yards away, Avery said. Got it? The smirk left Robert's face, and he looked at his younger brother in shock. Is that a threat, Avery? He asked. Avery shook his head. No, asshole. It's a goddamn promise, he said. Okay, Avery, I get it, Robert said. Hands off. Message received. They walked back to Lydia and his parents. May I dance, please? Asked Robert in a respectful tone. Lydia looked at Avery, who nodded his head in permission. What did you say to him? His father asked him when they left. I gave him some wise brotherly advice, Avery said, as he watched his wife and brother dance. He was relieved to see them keeping a respectful distance from each other. He turned to his father again. You know, Robert always managed to take my girlfriends with him when we were in high school, he said. I know, Avery, his father said. Believe me when I say I didn't approve of it. Yeah, but you didn't do anything to stop it either. Even when he was rubbing it in my face right in front of you, Avery told him. That's a different matter. She's my wife, and I damn well expect you to abide by your firm's morality clause. I understand, Avery, his father said. Look, I'm sorry about what happened, but it's all in the past. Can't we just put it in the past and move forward? Please, Avery, his mother added. Can you let go of your hatred for us so we can be a family again? We'll see, Mom, Avery said. Barbara smiled. That's all I'm asking for. I know you don't believe me, but we really love you, and we're proud of what you've done, she said. Avery nodded his head and hugged his mother. Thank you, he said. You're right, I don't believe you, but deep down I love you too. We have a lot of wounds to heal, and you can start by making sure he doesn't latch onto my wife, he added, looking at his father. I understand, son, Dan said. I'll take care of it personally. See to it, Avery said, when his wife and brother returned. As they left the reception to go on their honeymoon to Las Vegas, Avery turned around and saw Robert and his father discussing something quietly, looking at them. He had hoped for the best, but experience had taught him to expect the worst. On the way to Vegas, Lydia talked to him about his relationship with his family. You know, your brother is really a very charming man, she said. He even asked me to call him Bobby. Said all his friends call him that. But you don't call him that. And yet he's your brother. Why? Avery told her about his childhood, about his brother taking everything he had, even his girlfriends. He told her about the spankings and punishments he'd gotten for his brother's actions, and how his parents had always sided with Robert over him. When it was time to leave, that's what I did, he said. I put it all behind me and built my own life. Oh my God, Lydia said. I never knew, and they never mentioned you at all. Honestly, if I had known all that, I never would have applied to their firm. It's okay, Avery told her, but forewarned is forearmed. Watch out for Robert. He's nothing but trouble, and yes, his charm is just a tool to get his way. Trust me, I've seen it too many times. You can trust me, sweetheart, she said. I would never do anything to hurt you, ever. He trusted her, but he lived by the motto, trust but verify. He watched her, what she wore to work, when she had to stay late, how she smelled when she got home, and her general demeanor. 2 years after they were married, Jenny was born. She was his little girl and could always be counted on to make him happy. Lydia turned out to be a wonderful mother as well. For the first few years, his wife gave no signs that anything was wrong, even at various parties and firm events. He even warmed up to his parents a bit and let them spend time with his granddaughter. But he still kept an eye on what was going on. If anything was going on, they were great at hiding it. At a police seminar in San Diego in November 2008, he met Ben Jacobs, a jack-of-all-trades who did all sorts of things, financial planning, private investigations, and more. They hit it off right away, especially since Ben was also an army veteran. They became fast friends, and Avery felt he could trust him with his life. That's when he first learned of Lydia's betrayal. The previous Christmas, he had bought 2 new Apple iPhones with a virtual keyboard and the ability to send text messages. He kept one for himself and gave the other to her. He reasoned that they would help them stay in touch wherever they were. He was just heading back to their home in Los Angeles County when his phone rang, letting him know he had a text message. He looked at the screen and was shocked by what he saw. "Had a great time tonight, love. See you tomorrow," the message read. He verified that the message came from Lydia's phone and put the phone away. Although he didn't know who the lover was, he suspected it was Robert, since he didn't know who else she might be meeting with the next day, and he knew they often worked together on various projects and cases. He needed to come up with a plan before he got home, so he pulled off the freeway in Orange County and called Ben. "Hey Avery, how's it going?" asked Ben. "Avery, I got a strange message on my phone, and I need some help. Do you think you could do a little work as my private investigator?" he asked. "Sure, but it'll cost you," Ben said. "Yeah, okay," Avery said. He explained what had happened, and Ben said he'd start looking into it. "In the meantime, don't do anything stupid," Ben said. "Don't you dare do anything bad to your brother, you hear me?" "Yeah, I hear you," Avery said. "Give me a little time. It might take me a little while to get some evidence you can use against them, especially since they've been so careful so far," Ben told him. "Okay, stay in touch," Avery said. "I will," Ben said, ending the conversation. How could she? Avery asked himself. He fought the tears, but he couldn't. Even now, he wept, remembering that day. The nurse's voice brought him back to today. "Are you all right, Mr. Smith?" the nurse asked. He suddenly realized he was crying and wiped his eyes. "Yes," he wheezed through parched lips. "Can I get something to drink?" "Of course, Mr. Smith. I'll be right back," she said, and went to the nurse's station. She returned a minute later with a cup of ice water. As he sipped the water, the doctor entered the room. "Good news, Mr. Smith," he said. "All of your labs came back normal, so we're going to get the feeding tube out of you and take you to your room." Several nurses entered the room and began working on him. Soon, he was moved to a private room where he was able to eat real food for the first time in 10 years. While he ate, he watched the news, and when he finished, he heard a knock on the door. "Come in," he said, his voice still weak. "Johnny, how are you?" the man said as he entered the house. Avery looked at him and didn't recognize him at first. "It's me, Ben, remember?" "Yeah, I was just thinking about you," he said. Ben sat down next to Avery's bed and, closing the door, pulled out his briefcase. "How are you feeling?" he asked, opening the briefcase. Avery nodded his head. "Weak, but gaining strength," he said. "Tell me, Ben, what the hell happened? Why does everyone keep calling me Mr. Smith, and why did you call me Johnny?" "That's because Avery Wilson died 10 years ago," Ben said. Avery John looked at him shocked. "What? How?" he asked. "But I'm still alive." Ben shook his head. "No, Avery is dead," he said. "Your name is John Smith." According to officials, Avery was stripped of his soul during the home invasion, when he returned to retrieve some things from the house. "How much do you remember?" The man shook his head. Ben pulled out a laptop and set it in front of him. "Check this out," he said, opening the video. The video captured his wife Robert and Dan in a hotel room. After climaxing, they were sitting on the bed sipping their drink. "Avery's coming tomorrow to pick up the rest of the stuff," Lydia said. "Good," Dan said. "Then we can take care of him." He looked at Robert. "You think you have the guts to take down your own brother?" Robert laughed. "Really?" he asked. "Hell yeah, I've wanted to finish that bastard off for a long time." Dan and Lydia smiled. "See that it does," Dan said. "Make it look like a home invasion, and for heaven's sake, give yourself a good wash and don't leave anything behind." "I've got it under control," Robert said. As John sat there, shocked that his family was plotting his murder, Ben brought in another video. In this video, Avery is tied to a chair, and Robert and Lydia are lying on the bed. When they finished, They sat on the bed and looked at Avery, who was shaking his head. He tried to scream, but he was gagged and couldn't say anything. Robert grabbed the shotgun and pointed it at Avery, and Lydia laughed. "Well, well, look here," he said in the video. "That dumb motherfucker finally woke up. Wake up, wake up." As Avery focused on the scene before him, he began to struggle. "No time to waste, little brother. What are you thinking? I'm with your wife. Your daughter is really mine. And now I'm going to take your life," he said, as Lydia laughed. He pointed the shotgun and fired once, knocking over Avery and the chair. "Is he dead?" asked Lydia. "Please tell me you're done with him." Robert walked over to Avery and poked the body with the shotgun. Receiving no response, he lowered the shotgun. "Help me lift him out of this chair," he said to Lydia. "He should look like he was shot by a mugger." Lydia got off the bed and joined Robert, and the two of them pulled Avery out of the chair, positioning his body to make it look like he'd been caught off guard and killed by an intruder. They showered, changed clothes, and left. The video ended, but resumed later when Avery's body was placed on a gurney by paramedics. As they watched, Lydia and Robert cried in the background. "So you had video of Robert shooting me, but you didn't do anything with it?" asked John. "I had no choice," Ben said. "The feds told me to bury him. It seems your father and brother were under investigation for work they were doing with some pretty questionable personalities." "Organized crime?" asked John. Ben nodded his head. "Among other things," he said. "Hell, who do you think is funding your brother's election to the state senate? And how did I survive?" asked John. "Apparently, someone upstairs really likes you," Ben said. "There were a lot of injuries, but luckily Robert is a much better lawyer than shooter. That you survived at all is just a medical miracle. If you hadn't slipped into a coma, the feds would have put you in witness protection. They managed to make it look like you were dead. They even got a body that looked just like you for the funeral." "Lydia was there?" asked John. Ben laughed, nodding his head. "Oh yes, she played the part of the grieving widow to the end," Ben said. John laughed. "What about Jennifer?" asked John. "She's going to college soon," Ben said. "She missed you a lot and blames her mother for what happened. She's very resourceful. You'd be proud of her." "So who's paying for all this?" asked John. "Remember that lottery ticket you won?" he asked. John nodded his head. "You entrusted it to me, if you remember, so I made some investments and put it all in an offshore account. It's grown quite a bit, and that's what paid for your hospital stay. There's enough in that account to take care of you for the rest of your life if you're careful." "Thank you for that," John said. "I'd love to," Ben said. "So, what do you think happens next?" "I want to see my daughter," John said. "And I need to get revenge on the assholes who did this to me, all of them." Ben nodded his head. "I understand," he said. "I had a hunch you'd say that." Crucial moment. Chapter 2. They talked for a long time and discussed their plans for the future, which included revenge against Lydia, Robert, and Avery's parents. John even considered using his sniper skills against them, but Ben talked him out of it. "Don't you want to watch them suffer first?" asked Ben, a wicked grin appearing on his face. "What do you have in mind?" asked John. His mood improved considerably when Ben laid out a potential plan. By the time Ben left, John was in a great mood. He even readily accepted his new identity. "Oh yeah," he thought to himself, "they'll all pay for what they did to him." He spent the next few days in the hospital, gaining strength with each passing day. The events that led up to the shooting replayed in his mind. He remembered the last days of his previous life. December 2008, after receiving a message from Lydia, Avery gave Ben permission to install hidden cameras and microphones in the house. Ben went all out and even installed hidden microphones in his wife's car. He had no idea where the devices were located, which he thought was a good idea. Ben had somehow managed to install hidden cameras in their offices. He didn't know how his friend had managed it, so he didn't ask. 2 weeks after receiving the message, he received an email from his friend asking him to stop by his office. "Hey Avery," Ben said, entering and shaking his hand. "You ready for this?" Avery shook his head. "I don't know," he said. Ben nodded his head understandingly. "It's not pretty," he said. He held out a large stack of photographs showing Lydia and Robert. As far as he could tell, all of their dates had taken place either in a hotel room or in their office. In some of the photos, Lydia was with both Robert and his father Dan at the same time. One of the photos showed his mother, Barbara. It took everything he had not to get sick. "That's not all," Ben said, launching the video on his computer. He recognized his father's office. When they were done, Dan poured them drinks, and they settled into their seats. "You know, we've tried very hard to keep all this from Avery, but you know he'll figure it out pretty soon," Lydia said. "He may be a Boy Scout, but he's not stupid." Robert and his father laughed. "Please," Robert said condescendingly. "We've been doing this for 5 or 6 years, and he still hasn't figured it out. We could probably do anything right in front of him, and he wouldn't even realize what's going on." Dan laughed. "Maybe we should tell him about it for Christmas," he said. "How about this? After dinner this Christmas, we'll slip him something and let him watch it. We'll give him a little incentive, and if he doesn't follow the program, we'll go back to Plan B." "Plan B?" asked Lydia. "You mean let our friends from the East straighten him out?" "Something like that," Dan said. "Your husband isn't the only sniper, you know." Lydia laughed. "Do you think Barb would agree to that?" asked Lydia. "Who do you think came up with that idea?" said Dan. Lydia raised her glass. "Well then, here's to Barb and Christmas dinner," she said, smiling. The two men joined her. After the video ended, Avery felt even worse. "My God," he said. "They're all in on this. Even my mother." "Avery, you need to be very careful going forward," Ben said. "There are other videos here, and they're all just as bad. They've been very careful so far. As far as I've been able to find out, they were seeing each other about once a week or so, until the last few months." Ben pulled out a business card. "I took the liberty of setting you up with the most vicious divorcee in the county. I've already given her the evidence I showed you," he said. "Use my phone and make an appointment. She's expecting your call." Avery called and arranged to meet with the lawyer in the afternoon. "What about their plot to take me out?" asked Avery. "I've passed that information on to the FBI," Ben said. "But I'm not sure anything will come of it. Right now it's just talk. There's no evidence that anything was actually arranged. Bottom line, Avery, you need to be very careful. Act normal if you can. I know it's going to be hard, but you have to protect yourself. In any case, stay in touch, and I'll let you know if I find out anything more." Avery thanked his friend and went to meet with the lawyer. He made his way to the office of Sally McIntosh, his attorney. The receptionist ushered him into the office after he introduced himself. "Good afternoon, Officer Wilson," Sally said, shaking his hand. "Please call me Avery, Miss McIntosh," he said. "Only if you call me Sally," she said in response. She pulled out a large folder and got right down to business. Avery was impressed. "I've already talked to Ben, and he's provided me with the evidence he's collected. I have to tell you, this is probably the most confusing situation I've ever seen in my career. So, what do you expect from this? I would like to get custody of my daughter if she is truly mine, and I don't want to give her any support. I would also like to pursue Robert and my former parents," he said. Sally nodded her head. "You know California is a no-fault divorce state," Sally said. "We can file for irreconcilable differences and use the evidence as a bargaining chip in dividing the property. As for custody, I'm afraid you'd be on the losing end since most judges here give custody to the mother. There is a chance that given your wife's earnings, you may be able to get by without alimony. We can make that argument and see what the judge says." "What about Robert and the rest of my family?" he asked. "Unfortunately, California law doesn't allow lawsuits citing alienation of affection. We may be able to find other causes of action, but I'm not too sure what will come of it," she said. "All right," Avery said. "Do what needs to be done." "When do you want her serviced?" asked Sally. Avery thought for a moment. "Christmas Day," he said. "At my parents' house." Sally laughed. "You're cold-blooded," she said. "A divorce for Christmas. I'm fine with that, given what I've seen. I'll also add a protective order to keep her and your family as far away from you as possible." "Thank you," Avery said. "I'm really sorry about the way things turned out, Avery." "You seem like a good person," Sally said, ending the meeting. Avery drove home in a fog, thinking over everything he had seen and heard. Never in his life had he thought his whole family would conspire against him like this. Lydia sensed something was wrong and tried to approach him. "What's wrong, darling?" she asked. Avery shook his head in bewilderment. "I just have a lot of worries," he said. "One of my friends found out his wife was cheating on him. He's taking it really hard." "I'm sorry to hear that," she said. "I would never do that to you." "Yeah, right," he thought. "You know that, don't you?" He looked at her for a moment before shaking his head. "I hope never," he said monotonously. Lydia didn't know how to feel about that. Does he really know? She asked herself. After she left, he stayed in his office and reviewed the evidence Ben had given him. He shook his head in disbelief. "Are you going to bed?" asked Lydia. Avery shook his head and waved her off. "I've got a lot on my mind." "Get up," he said. He ended up falling asleep on the couch in his office. Lydia woke him up the next morning. "Why didn't you come to bed last night?" she asked. "I was waiting for love." He looked at her in disbelief. "I was just going through some things," he said. "Well, you know we're having a company Christmas party tonight, right?" she asked. He nodded his head. "I expect you in the office around 4:30 in the afternoon. I hope your mood improves before then." "Yes, of course," he said. She leaned in to kiss him and touched his cheek when he turned his head. "Love you," she said as she walked out. "Yeah, me too," he replied half seriously. "Does he know?" she asked herself as she left the house. That afternoon, Avery went to his wife's Christmas party, which was always held at the office where she worked. Robert met him as he walked in. "Look who the cat dragged in," he said, his speech slurred from the alcohol. Avery waved away the offer of a drink and picked up a bottle of water. "What? Are you too good to drink with us now?" asked Robert. "I'm still on duty," Avery said. "I hope you're not planning on driving today?" "What? Is little brother going to arrest me?" muttered Robert. "Only if you break the law," Avery said. Lydia and his father walked over to him. Lydia wanted to kiss him, but he turned away. "Avery's threatening to arrest me," Robert said. "Can you believe that shit?" Dan looked at him. "I'd probably bust you too after all you've had to drink," Dan said. He held out his hand to shake Avery's. "Good to see you, son. Come on in and join the party." Avery, keeping his hand on his gun, followed his father and wife. Lydia put her arm around her husband's waist. "Relax," she said. "You look like you're waiting for someone to attack you." Avery looked at his wife. "Uniformed cops are always a target, you know that," he said. He looked around at his surroundings and noticed they were looking at him with pity. A few of Lydia's co-workers shook his hand and thanked him for his service, but he could see it in their eyes. They knew, all of them. After a while he excused himself and went to the men's room. Robert was there, washing his hands. Avery noticed the large diamond-encrusted Rolex on his arm. "Nice watch," Avery said. "Are these new?" Robert took it off and held it out to Avery. "Yes," he said. "It was a gift." Avery looked at it and turned it over. "Merry Christmas, with all our love. Your two girls, Lydia and Jenny," the inscription read. Avery handed the watch back, noticing the smirk on Robert's face. "Nice," Avery said when he was done. He washed his hands and left before Robert could say anything. He caught up with Lydia and his father as they were talking to someone. "I have to go," he said. "Something's happened, and I need to deal with it." Lydia turned to kiss him, but he was gone before she could say or do anything. He didn't look back. In that moment, he didn't care. After his shift was over, he went to a bar and had a couple of beers before heading home. Why did she do that? He asked himself. Lydia was home by the time he arrived and was furious. "Where have you been?" she asked. "I finished my shift and went out for a couple of beers," he said. "Why do you care?" "I care," she said. "You're my husband, and I love you." "How much did Robert's Rolex cost you?" he asked. Lydia's eyes widened. "Did you see that?" she asked. "Yes, I have seen it. And I saw what you wrote." "Your two girls? Really? Jenny is his daughter?" "Tell me, wife," he said. He's her uncle and my brother-in-law, she said. That's all. Really? Asked Avery. Please don't insult my intelligence. I saw the way everyone in your office looked at me. I'm not stupid. It's not what you think, she said. Yes, of course. Sorry, I don't believe you, he said. Look, you asked me what I wanted for Christmas. Now all I need is your signature. My signature? She asked. On what? In the divorce papers, he said. Divorce? She asked. I don't want a divorce. I love you. You're my husband. Of course I do, he said. When you do what you want with another man, that's what you say? I know a lot more than you think I do, so don't lie to me. I just want to know 2 things. What? She asked. Why and for how long? He said. Lydia lowered her eyes to the floor. This has been going on for months after I started at the firm, she said. You mean to tell me that this went on for most of our marriage? He asked. She nodded her head. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to hurt you. It was just an evening. You don't remember anything I told you about Robert? Asked Avery. Did I ever hint to you that I would enjoy being a cuckold? I'm so sorry, she said. He was so slick and charming. I did my best not to let you find out. When did my father have time to get involved in this case? He asked. Lydia's eyes widened. How did you know? She asked. It doesn't matter how. How long have you also been having a good time with my father? He asked. It started about a year ago, she said. We were all very careful. We really didn't want to hurt you. Am I Jenny's father? He asked. Of course you are, she said. You'll forgive me if I don't believe you, Avery said. I'll do a DNA test to find out for sure. How dare you, she began before Avery exploded. No, you fool, he said. How dare you? You know how much I hated that bastard, but you still had to go into his arms. And my father. No, this is all on your conscience. And yes, I'm filing for divorce. All these years, I loved you and only you. I took care of you when you were sick, and I took care of Jenny because you were too busy. You were my life, and you stuck a knife in my back. Fuck you. Now leave me alone. I'll try not to ruin Jenny's holiday, but you and that bastard better not mess with me. Period. He took a few things and settled down in his study. He avoided his wife as much as he could and didn't say anything to her. He spent as much time as he could with his daughter, knowing that he would soon be a part-time father. Ben contacted him later to let him know he had a new video. Looks like you've really stirred up a hornet's nest, Ben said, as Avery walked into the office. Ben started up the latest video as Avery sat down. The video was from his father's office. The usual. He knows, Lydia said. Robert and Dan shrugged. So what? Robert said. It doesn't change anything. He filed for divorce, Lydia said. Have you been served yet? Asked Dan. Lydia shook her head. Not yet, but I expect it to happen soon, she said. Well, I guess we'll have to enlighten your husband to see what this is all about. He can either agree or, Dan said. Just be careful, Lydia said. Don't worry, Robert said. He's just a stupid fucking cop. He can't do anything to us. Avery sat silent as the video ended. Be very careful, Ben said. I've already forwarded this to Sally and talked to your supervisor. He told me that patrols will be keeping order. Ben handed him a key to an apartment where Avery could stay for a while. Avery thanked him and headed for the exit. On Christmas morning, Lydia asked if he would go to his parents' house. Yes, I'll be there, he said. She leaned in to kiss him, but he waved her away. Save it for your lovers, he said. Please don't ruin Christmas, she said, as she walked out with Jenny. You mean even more than you've already screwed up? He asked. Come on, get out of here. I'll be there soon. After seeing Lydia off, he put on his uniform and made sure he had his body armor on him. Most of his clothes and personal belongings were already packed and lying in the car. He called the bailiff to confirm a time when he would be at the Wilson house to make an appointment, and then called the shift supervisor to have a patrol car ready. He carefully timed his arrival and met the bailiff a block away from the house. The man got into his car and drove up to the house. They got out of the car and Avery rang the doorbell. Avery's father opened the door and was shocked to see his son and another man. What does that mean, Avery? He asked. You don't need to ring the bell. We've all been wondering when you were going to get here. Please, Mr. Wilson, Avery said in his best police voice, putting his hand on his gun. I'm here on official business. Is Lydia Wilson here? Yes, she is. You know she is. Please come in, Dan said. Avery shook his head. Not today, Mr. Wilson. Have Mrs. Wilson come to the door, please, Avery said. Dan nodded his head and called for Lydia, who appeared with Jenny. She was approached by the bailiff. Mrs. Lydia Wilson? He asked. She nodded her head as he verified her identity and handed her an envelope. You have been served. Lydia began to cry as she opened the envelope. You're serving me divorce papers on Christmas Day? She asked, tears streaming down her cheeks. How could you? This is much better than what you and my former family had planned for me, I think, Avery said. Jenny cried as she looked at her mother and looked at her father. He knelt down and hugged his daughter. What's going on, Daddy? She asked. I'm sorry, honey, but your mom has decided she doesn't love me anymore, he said, hugging her as she cried. I'll see you as soon as I can, and don't ever forget that I love you, okay? Jenny, crying, turned to her mother and kicked her in the shin. I hate you, she screamed, running away. Dan squeezed in behind the sobbing Lydia. How dare you come here and disrupt our family Christmas, he growled. Mr. Wilson, consider yourself lucky that I'm not going to arrest you and the rest of your family for conspiracy, Avery said, handing him another envelope that contained photos and videos of their dates at the Marriott. He was very careful not to include anything in the envelope that had been recorded in their offices. By this time, Barbara and Robert had arrived at the door. What's going on? Asked Barbara. Avery just served Lydia with divorce papers, Dan said. He knows. Barbara stepped back, her face going white. Yes, and I know all about what the four of you have planned for me, Avery said. I suggest you study the protective order carefully and follow it to the letter. I have no problem arresting you if you violate it. An order of protection? Shouted Robert. Yeah, I should be kicking your ass right now, he added, holding out his hand to Avery. Dan intercepted him as Avery prepared to grab his gun. Don't touch him, you fool, Dan shouted. Robert yanked his hand away. Dan looked at Avery. Okay, asshole, if that's how you want to play. You could have been part of something great, but you blew it, he said. I thought I was part of something great, Avery said. He looked at Lydia. I'll call you after the first one, and set up a time when I can pick up the rest of your stuff. In the meantime, I suggest you obey your orders and stay away from me. Okay, Avery, she said. I'm sorry. Yeah, Avery said. Goodbye. Merry Christmas. Avery went to the apartment Ben had prepared for him and unpacked. Merry fucking Christmas. He spent the rest of the day drowning his sorrows in a bottle of Jack Daniels. The next week, he got a call from his father. I want to see you in my office this afternoon, Dan ordered. Avery laughed. People in hell want ice water too, he said. That's not going to happen. Did you forget about the protective order? If you want to meet, you can call my attorney and arrange to meet at her office in her presence. He ended the conversation before Dan could say anything else and contacted Sally. She wasn't thrilled that he had called during her holiday vacation, but listened to what Avery said and agreed to meet Dan, Robert, and Lydia in her office. She also agreed to contact Dan and make arrangements. After lunch, the five of them met in a conference room in Sally's office. Couldn't it have waited until after New Year's? Asked Sally. No, it doesn't, Dan said. Are you Mrs. Wilson's lawyer? Asked Sally. Dan looked at Robert. Robert Wilson and I are both her attorneys, he said. I guess you really don't care about things like conflict of interest, do you? Asked Sally. Well, we'll see what the State Bar Association has to say about that. What was so important you had to do to meet with my client over the holiday? Dan pulled a folder out of his briefcase and placed it on the table. I want Avery to call off this stupid divorce and sign this agreement, he said. Sally read the paper inside and laughed. She handed the paper to Avery, who read it too, not believing what he was seeing. Do you seriously believe that my client would waive his rights as a husband and agree to his wife spending evenings with you and his brother? Mr. Wilson, you are out of your mind, and rest assured I will take this case to the State Bar. Now get out of my office before I throw you out, she said. "I'm going to destroy all of you," Dan Avery said. "When I'm done with you, you're going to wish you'd never been born into the world." "No. You know it's against the law to convey threats to a police officer," Sally said. "Get out before I have you all arrested." Blushing, Dan, Lydia, and Robert left the office. Avery apologized to Sally and thanked her warmly. "I can't wait to get this asshole in front of a judge," she said, as she closed her office. Avery kept his word and called Lydia after New Year's Eve to set up a time when he could pick up the rest of his things. She told him that no one would be at the house, and he naively believed her. As soon as he entered the house, he felt a prick in his neck, after which everything around him was plunged into darkness. He was still unconscious when he realized he was tied to a chair. He tried to move but couldn't, and realized that his mouth was taped shut. He struggled but couldn't get free. Before he saw a bright flash of light, he heard someone say something about taking his life. That was the last thing he remembered before he woke up in the hospital. John's rehabilitation went better than anyone could have imagined. Not only had his memory returned to him, but his body as well, and he felt as strong as ever. He noticed that the doctors had performed reconstructive surgery on his face, apparently to remove the scars left by the shooting. It wasn't much, and there were a few small scars left, but it was enough to make him look much different than before. Ben also provided him with special lenses that masked the color of his eyes. According to Ben, his daughter was in the habit of visiting his grave at least once a week, usually on Tuesday mornings on her way to school. John wanted to see Jenny up close, and they decided it would be best if he could disguise his eye color when they finally met. They have also agreed on a revenge plan that will be put into action after John gets out of rehab. Luckily, today was the day. Ben arrived at the rehab center, just as John was receiving his final instructions. He gathered his things and went to his friend's car. On the way to the apartment Ben had prepared for him, they discussed a plan of action and agreed not to start until John met Jenny. Once at the complex, Ben helped his friend get his things upstairs. John looked around the two-room apartment. He was impressed by the furniture Ben had picked out for him, and especially impressed by the large flat-screen TV hanging on the wall. After showing him around, Ben handed him the keys to his apartment, the keys to a brand new SUV, and new bank cards. During his rehabilitation, John was reacquainted with the latest technology, learned how to use a smartphone and the latest version of the Windows operating system, and was able to start using the new computer that Ben had set up in the front room. After thanking his friend, John went to rest. Later, he took the SUV out to the highway to get a feel for driving. He knew he'd have to get used to driving in Southern California again, and he didn't want to do that at all. He walked into the liquor store and picked up a bottle of Jack Daniels and a pack of cigarettes. He hadn't smoked since he'd joined the police force, but he wanted to, and decided that since he was already technically dead, it didn't matter. Back home, he rested up for the day and watched TV. Relaxing with a glass of JD and a cigarette, he went to bed. The next day, he woke up early, showered, dressed, and headed to the cemetery, hoping to make it in time for Jenny. He found the grave marker and sat down to wait, sipping the coffee he'd bought on the way. Soon he spotted her walking down the path. He dropped the nearly empty cup into the trash can and stood up. She stopped at the grave and seemed to be saying something as he approached her. Before she spoke, she looked at him. "Did you know my father?" she asked. He nodded his head before he spoke. "Yes, as a matter of fact, it was. We were in the army together," John said. He held out his hand. "Smith, John Smith," he said. Jenny took his hand and looked at it carefully. "Jenny Wilson. Nice to meet you, Mr. Smith. John Smith." He smiled. "Please call me John," he said. She smiled and turned to the gravestone. "He was a hero, you know," she said. "Served on the police force." Tears came to her eyes. "You miss your father a lot, don't you?" he asked. She nodded her head. "I haven't seen him since I was 8 years old," she said. "I miss him so much. I love coming here early in the morning and saying hi. My mom would kill me if she found out." "Really?" asked John. "Yes," she said. "She married my uncle after my father's soul was taken. My father had just filed for divorce. His soul was taken from him shortly afterward." "Do you know how it happened?" asked John. "Supposedly he was ruined by a burglar," she said. "I take it you don't believe that," John said. She shook her head. My father was the best police officer. I don't believe he was caught off guard, she said. However, I can't prove otherwise. What do you think happened? Asked John. I don't know, she said. I just can't believe the burglar caught him off guard. John nodded his head. It happens, you know, he said. Yes, but not to my dad, Jenny said. So, if you don't mind my asking, have you decided what you want to do with your life yet? Asked John. I don't mind, John, she said. I plan to go to UCLA this fall. I want to be a lawyer, but not like my mom or my uncle. I want to be a prosecutor. I want to put bad guys away. I think I owe it to my dad. Your father would be proud of you, John said, and tears came to his eyes. He wanted so badly to hug this girl and tell her that everything was going to be okay and that he was proud of her. She stared at him for a while before she spoke. I have to go now, John. Would you mind if we stayed in touch? I don't know why, but I feel safe with you, even though we just met. Something about you reminds me of my father, she said. John smiled. Of course, Jenny. Can I give you my number? Please feel free to call me anytime, he said. Sure, she said, smiling. I hope you won't mind if I call after hours? He shook his head. Not at all, Jenny, he said. Call me anytime you want. They exchanged numbers, and Jenny left. He headed toward his SUV and didn't see Jenny put his discarded coffee cup away in a plastic bag. He also didn't see her write down the license plate number on his car. John left the cemetery and headed for the Griffith Park Observatory. It was time to put the plan into action. Once there, he looked around the town, the place where he had once served as a police officer. He pulled out the 2 cell phones Ben had bought. He activated the first one, set the number to private, and plugged in the voice changer Ben had given him. He selected the desired effect and dialed the number. The second call was answered by a woman. He recognized Lydia's voice. Lydia Wilson, she said sharply. Why? Why did you kill me? He asked before hanging up the phone. He quickly turned off the phone and removed the battery. Lydia had just left a meeting with her husband's supporters when the phone rang. She heard the message and tried to answer, but the call had already ended. She thought it sounded like the voice of her late husband, Avery, but she couldn't be sure. Surely Avery wasn't calling her from beyond the grave, she told herself. She considered calling her back until she realized the incoming number was set to private. She knew her current husband had enemies and wondered if the call had come from one of them. John, meanwhile, activated the second phone. This time he used it to send a text message to Robert's phone with a picture attached. The caption read, "Remember my promise." And the picture was a snapshot of Robert taken recently outside his office, with the crosshairs over his groin. After making sure the message had been sent, he turned the phone off and removed the battery. Both phones were later smashed and their shards thrown into various trash cans nearby. Robert, of course, saw the picture and read the inscription. He knew it referred to the promise Avery had made to him on his wedding day so long ago. But that's impossible, he thought. Avery had been dead for 10 years, and no one, not even Lydia, knew what his younger brother had said to him. Things were tense in the Wilson household that evening. Robert and Lydia shared their worries with each other, but dismissed them as political enemies and thought no more about it. John followed the plan he and Ben had agreed on and waited 3 days before making a second call. This time he traveled to neighboring Orange County and then sent Lydia a screenshot of a video of Robert shooting him. The caption to the message read, "Your sins will find you." The ringing on Robert's phone was different too. This time he whispered, "Remember, I can take your soul from 1,000 yards away." Then hung up. As before, he destroyed both phones and tossed their shards into various trash cans before heading home. Robert and Lydia were already very nervous. No one but they and Avery knew about what had happened in that bedroom 10 years ago, and Avery was dead. How could this have happened? They asked each other. Following the plan John and Ben had devised, they didn't call or text again for several days. John knew Ben was busy gathering information on Robert, so he spent his free time reminiscing about the events of the past 10 years. Then he got a phone call. Opening his smartphone, he noticed it was a call from Jenny. "John Smith," he replied. "Hi, John. It's Jenny. Remember me?" He smiled. He could never forget his little girl. "Of course," he said. "What can I do for you?" "Can we meet tomorrow morning at my father's grave, around 6 in the morning?" she asked. "Of course," he said. "I'll be there. Is everything okay?" "I need someone to talk to, I really do," she said. "Okay, I'll see you there in the morning," he told her. "Thank you," she said before hanging up. He wondered what she wanted to talk to him about. The next day he sat on a bench near the grave and waited for Jenny. She came on time and sat down beside him. "Good morning," he said. She returned the greeting. He could tell she was really nervous about something. "A penny for your thoughts," he said. She looked at the grave, then back at him. She opened her purse, pulled out an envelope, and held it out to him. "What's this?" he asked. "You know, I remember the last time I saw my dad alive," she said. "After the funeral, Mom married my Uncle Robert, and he insisted that I call him Dad. I refused, even though it made my mom very angry. He kept telling me he was my father, but I didn't believe him. Now I've learned the truth. He's not my real father." She looked at his face. "He is." John was shocked. How could she know, he puzzled. She pointed to the envelope. "I apologize for the intrusion, but after our meeting, I took your coffee cup and cigarette butt from the trash can. You know those things can take your soul," she said. He laughed. "Something about you reminded me of that day 10 years ago. You know, you can wear contact lenses to change your eye color, get a facial, change your hair color, even mess up your fingerprints. But you can't change your DNA. They were able to get enough saliva from what I found to identify you as my father with a 99.9% probability." "Wow," John said. "Ben was right about you. You're resourceful. You're going to be one hell of a prosecutor someday." Jenny smiled. "So who are you really? And who is buried in my father's grave if it's not you?" she asked. "The man you knew as Avery Wilson died 10 years ago," he said. "My name is actually John Smith. You can thank the feds for that. The official story is that Avery was killed in a home invasion. But it's not true, is it?" she asked. He shook his head. "No," he said. "Not even close." "I knew it. I want to know the truth, Daddy," she said. "You owe me that." He loved hearing her call him Daddy, and he knew she was right, but he wasn't sure she could handle the whole truth. "Are you really sure about that?" he asked. "It's much worse than you can imagine." He saw tears in her eyes. "Yeah, I need to know," she said, "no matter how bad it is." "I understand things aren't going well in the Wilson household," John said. Jenny shook her head. "No," she said. "Mom and Robert have been on edge the last few days. From what I understand, they've been getting strange calls and text messages, and it's really upsetting them." "But that's not all, is it?" asked John. Tears streamed down her cheeks, though she tried not to cry. "Did they hurt you?" She burst into tears and John wrapped his arms around her. It felt so good to hold his girl again, and he wanted to ease her pain. "You'd probably hate me if I told you," she said. John shook his head. "I could never hate you," he said. "You're my little princess, and you always will be." She loved hearing those words from him, and she tried her best to hold herself together before continuing. "Robert molested me," she said quietly. John felt furious when she spoke. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. "Long time," she said. "Damn bastard," John thought. "Did you call 911? he asked. She nodded. "A couple times," she said. "They sent someone and examined me, but my mom said it wasn't true. After that, they beat me and locked me in a room. They threatened me that they would hurt me a lot if I told anyone else anything." "What's on your schedule for today?" asked John. "Nothing, really. School is over, but I can't be at home anymore," she said. "Now I'm just waiting for high school to end so I can move out and go to college." "You said you wanted to see the proofs. How about you come to my place so I can show them to you?" he asked. Her eyes lit up. "Really?" she asked. "Yes, I'd like that very much." John pulled out his cell phone and called Ben. "Hey John, how's it going?" he asked. "Ben, I need you at my house right now. There's been a change of plan," John said. Ben knew better than to press his friend. "All right," he said. "I'll be right there." John ended the conversation and walked Jenny to her car. "Follow me," he told her. "I'm in that SUV over there," he added, pointing to his car. He drove to his apartment, making sure Jenny was behind him the whole time. He walked Jenny to his apartment and invited her inside. "It's not as nice as your place, but it's home," he said. "She's perfect, Daddy," Jenny said, looking around, although the feminine notes in here could use some work. She accepted his offer of coffee, and he turned on his coffee maker and let her choose the flavor she wanted. After drinking coffee, they sat down at his table. "So where is this evidence?" she asked. "Are you really sure you want to see this?" he asked. "It's very visual." "I told you I had to see this," she said. John opened his laptop and pulled out the video of Dan, Robert, and Lydia planning to take his soul, followed by a video of the shooting itself. Her face turned white and tears ran down her cheeks. "Oh my God," she said when the video ended. "I can't believe they actually plotted this." At that time, Ben knocked on the door. John let him in and introduced him to Jenny. "So what's going on?" asked Ben, sitting down. "Jenny knows who I am," John said. "And she told me that Robert molested her. I can't just sit here and let this go on." Ben nodded his head. "I understand," he said. "So you think it's time to step up the work?" "Yeah," John said. Ben thought for a moment before he spoke. Before he spoke, he looked at Jenny. "Would you like to help us?" he asked. "Oh yes, anything I can do to help," she said. Ben looked at John. "We could use eyes and ears in the Wilson house," he said. "Maybe she'll set up some cameras and let us watch her house." "I don't want her in danger," John said. "No, it won't," Ben said. "Would you go for it, Jenny?" asked John. Jenny nodded her head. "Of course," she said. "I'm over 18, and I want to help, and there's not a damn thing you can do to stop me, Daddy," she added, emphasizing the daddy. "Besides," she added, "I've been taking self-defense classes for the past few months, and I told Robert that if he touched me one more time, he'd be in trouble. He hasn't touched me since." John felt pride in his heart at his daughter's words. She was definitely his girl. "All right," Ben said. "I'll get the equipment ready for you and show you how to use it." He looked at John. "Maybe it's time to go to the media. I'll set up an interview and get back to you." "Is there anyone we can trust in the DA's office?" asked John. Ben shook his head. "Things have changed a lot in the last 10 years, John," Ben said. "As much as I'd like to see all 3 of them taken to justice, the fact is that they'll drag it out in the courts for years, and there's no guarantee that anything will be done. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is right now." "Then it's up to us," John said. "Maybe we can get the people back east involved," Ben said. "You know, they don't care much for publicity." John knew what that meant. He hated the idea, but realized it might be their best hope. "Okay," John said. "Set up an interview. I'll keep doing what I've been doing. Maybe we can get some pressure on them." He looked at Jenny. "Set up the cameras like Ben said, and don't take any chances. If you feel you're in danger, call me and Ben immediately. You can stay here if you need to. Any questions?" Ben and Jenny shook their heads. "Okay, let's go." They headed for the exit, and John hugged his daughter. "I'm so proud of you, Jenny," he said, and tears threatened to flow down his cheek. Jenny smiled and kissed her father on the cheek. "I love you, Daddy," she said. "I love you too, Princess," he replied. The next few days passed like a blur. John continued his campaign of calls and messages, pushing Lydia and Robert even further toward a breakup. Jenny, following Ben's instructions, set up cameras and microphones throughout the house. Even the house phones were hooked up. Robert and Lydia couldn't use the bathroom without Ben and John finding out. As a result, John, Ben, and Jenny gathered even more evidence against Robert and Lydia, including phone conversations with suspicious shadowy figures who supported Robert's campaign. Ben collected and analyzed all the videos and phone conversations, separating the daily trivia from the important stuff. Ben also met with a Los Angeles Times reporter he knew and trusted, and she contacted John. "John Smith," he said as his phone rang. "Mr. Smith, this is Elizabeth Johnson from the Times. I was talking to a friend of yours and he said you have some material for me. Can we talk sometime soon? Of course, John said. I also have a video to show you if you're interested. Yes, I'm very interested, she said. Can you come by this afternoon? Yes, I can come over this afternoon. What time? Asked John. They agreed to meet in the conference room at the newspaper's office at 2 p.m. in the afternoon and then conclude their conversation. John looked at his watch. The meeting was a little over an hour away, so he gathered his things and headed out. He finally found a parking spot and headed to the conference room where he met Elizabeth. She looked about his age, with short blonde hair. She looked good, even in her professional attire. John naturally looked at her fingers and saw no wedding or engagement rings. He held out his hand to her. "Miss Johnson?" he asked. She smiled and took his hand. "Please call me Liz," she said. "Come in and have a seat. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Tea? Latte?" "Coffee is always welcome," he said with a smile. Liz pressed a button on the intercom and ordered 2 cups of coffee. "Ben Jacobs told me you have a story about Robert Wilson, and from what he told me, it sounds pretty interesting," she said. John nodded his head. "Liz, how much do you know about the death of his brother Avery?" asked John. "As I recall, the official story is that his soul was taken from him during the home invasion," she said. "Are you saying that's not true? Let me show you a couple videos, and you decide for yourself. Then I'll tell you my story, if you're still interested. And I should warn you that these videos are quite unusual," John said. Crucial moment. Chapter 3. "Is that normal? Sure," she said as John booted up his laptop. He went to the folder and showed her the video of Robert, Dan, and Lydia plotting their case, and then showed her the video of the shooting itself. When the video was over, Liz sat in her chair, stunned. "Well, what do you think?" asked John. "Are you interested?" "Of course I'm interested," she said. "Where did you get these videos from?" "I'll explain. But first I want to know how much of it is recorded?" asked John. "If there's anything you want to keep behind the scenes, just tell me," she said. John thought for a moment. "Okay, Liz," John said. "Ben says he trusts you, and that's good enough for me. This part is definitely off the record. Officially, Avery Wilson died 10 years ago. John Smith, me, spent 10 years in a coma as a result of that shooting. I was Avery Wilson. The feds got comfortable with the new identity, and they had to put Avery in protective custody. For some reason, their case was hushed up, and nothing came of it. But Avery is still dead, if the world is to be believed. Do you agree with me?" "Yeah," Liz said. "You know, I'm going to have to check it out before anything gets published. I'll definitely have to analyze those videos." "I understand," John said. "If you check your public records, you'll see that Avery, meaning me, filed for divorce in December 2008, and the papers were served on Christmas Day. The shooting happened shortly after the first of the year. You should also find the agreement offered by Robert and his father, who acted as Lydia's attorneys." He continued to tell Liz his story, stopping only when he reached a fragment he wished to leave out. "Let me show you something else," John said, pulling out the DNA test that Jenny had made him. He showed it to Liz, who realized what the paper said. "Oh my God," she said. "You really are Avery Wilson. Or was Avery Wilson. Look, there's a lot more to this story. Would you mind discussing it over dinner?" asked John. Liz smiled. "Maybe," she said. "Let me think about it for a while and I'll call you, okay?" "Sounds good, Liz," he said. "I'll look forward to hearing from you." They said goodbye and John headed home. The next day he got a call from Liz. "Mr. Smith," she said, "I hope you're not in too much of a hurry, but I'd like to take you up on your offer of dinner." "Sure," John said. "Where would you like to go?" "Well, there will be a political meeting there with some of the candidates, including Robert," she said. "I'll even have a chance to ask some questions. Are you still interested?" "Sounds interesting," John said. "Sure, give me the details and I'll pick you up." After Liz had given him the information he needed, he called Ben to let him know. "Are you crazy?" asked Ben. "It's going to be okay," John said. "I'm dead, remember?" "Be careful and let Liz ask questions, got it?" asked Ben. "Yeah, got it," John said. John called his daughter to warn her that he would be there with Liz, "Thank you for letting me know," she said. "I'll be there too, of course, so I'll act like we've never met." "Thank you," John said. Later, he put on his best suit and picked Liz up at her apartment. She looked ravishing in her evening gown. "You look gorgeous," he said, when she opened the door. She smiled. "Thank you, sir. You're looking rather dressy yourself," she said. They arrived at the event and mingled with the line heading to dinner. Liz handed her invitation, which included her and one other person, to an usher who waved them in. Robert, Lydia, and Jenny stood at the door and shook hands with everyone entering. John held his breath, hoping neither Lydia nor Robert would recognize him. Robert held out his hand to Liz as she approached him. "Good evening, Miss Johnson," he said, taking her hand. "It's good to see you. And I see you've brought a friend with you," he added, extending his hand to John. John thought he was about to be at a loss for words, but with a sigh, he shook Robert's hand. "And you?" he asked. "Smith. John Smith," John told him. He lowered his gaze and noticed that Robert was wearing the Rolex watch that Lydia had given him that fateful Christmas. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Smith. This is my wife, Lydia, and my daughter Jenny," he added. John nodded to Lydia and Jenny. Jenny smiled politely, and Lydia looked at him strangely. She didn't look too good, John thought. There were wrinkles around her eyes and mouth. She looked tired and thin. Too thin, he thought. John thought that maybe she recognized him, but dismissed the thought. "Mrs. Wilson, Miss Wilson," he said unceremoniously before moving on. John and Liz made their way to their assigned seat and sat down, introducing themselves to the others at the table. He leaned toward Liz. "The watch he wears, Lydia gave it to him 10 years ago," he whispered. "Really?" she asked. "Interesting." Dinner went well, or as well as a political rubber chicken dinner can go. John choked on his food and made light conversation with the others at the table. He occasionally glanced at Robert and saw Jenny scrutinizing him. He wasn't sure, but he thought she gave him a thumbs up. He smiled and went back to his dinner. Finally, the lunch portion of the event ended, and the host introduced the candidates on stage. Robert was the first candidate to address the crowd. After giving the standard speech about bringing accountability back to Sacramento, the floor was open to reporters for questions. Liz raised her hand and was chosen first. She stood up and introduced herself. "Elizabeth Johnson, Los Angeles Times," she said. "This is your first time on the political stage, and we don't know much about you, Mr. Wilson. Can you tell us how close you were to your brother, Officer Avery Wilson?" "Thank you for your question, Miss Johnson," he said. "My brother and I were very close, always have been. His death hit all of us very hard." "I see," Liz said. "And you married your brother's widow shortly after his funeral 10 years ago, correct?" "That's right," he said. "So, can you explain to us why your brother named both you and your father in his divorce from his wife, which, by the way, was finalized less than a month before he lost his soul?" asked Liz. A resounding sigh rippled through the room. "That was 10 years ago, Miss Johnson," Robert said. "My brother suffered from paranoia, probably as a result of his military service. I don't know why he did it. But in the divorce papers, there is a proposal put forward by both you and your father that would strip Officer Wilson of his husband's rights," Liz said. "Could you explain that? And is it normal for two senior members of a law firm to take on such a simple divorce?" "I don't recall such a suggestion," Robert replied nervously. "As for introducing Lydia, we did so in gratitude for her years of faithful service to us." He looked around the room. "Next," he exclaimed, before Liz could ask another question. He pointed to a man 2 tables away from Liz. "Brad Williams, Orange County Register," he said. "Would you mind answering Miss Johnson's question? Were you having an affair with your brother's wife during that fateful night?" Sighs were heard in the room. John saw Lydia lower her gaze to her plate when the question was asked. "It's an outrageous accusation," Robert said. "I thought everything about my brother. I loved him. No one was more saddened by the news of his death than I was. At that time, your firm was under investigation by federal authorities for allegations of ties to organized crime. Can you tell us how that investigation ended?" asked Brad. "We were cleared of all charges and the case was dismissed," Robert said. "Next." He pointed to another woman a few tables over. "Jane Holliday, KTTV News," she said. "As I recall, the FBI never closed the case. They just said they couldn't find any hard evidence to support their claims. Isn't that right?" "The result was the same as ours," Robert said. "If there had been any sense in the charges, my father would never have been elected to his seat on the court." John noticed that Robert was visibly nervous. The moderator stood up and ended the question and answer session before introducing the next candidate. "I don't think he did himself any favors," John whispered to Liz. She smiled and nodded her head. "I think you're right," she said. "You might want to watch the evening news when you get home." After a couple hours, the event was over and everyone got up to leave. Robert, Lydia, and Jenny headed for the door, but John and Liz intercepted them. "Mr. Wilson," John said, holding out his hand. Robert stopped and shook his hand. "I couldn't help but notice your watch. It's a very beautiful piece. May I see it, please?" Robert removed the watch and held it out to him. John examined it and turned it over, showing Liz the inscription on the back, which was exactly as he had described to her the day before. He handed it back to Robert. "I knew someone who had a very similar watch," John said. He looked at Lydia. "You must love your husband very much to give him something like that?" Lydia smiled. "Yes, I know, Mr. she began. "Smith," John said. "It's a pleasure to meet you, friends. Please have a nice evening." He nodded to Jenny, who smiled. Robert gave Lydia a hug, and the three of them left quickly. John and Liz watched them leave. "I think you just got your story, John," Liz said. John nodded, turning to Liz. "I guess so," he said, picking up Liz's sweater. "Now that it's over, don't you want to go somewhere nice? Maybe have a real dinner?" She smiled. "I'd love to, John, but I have to get home and get this story formalized to get it in the morning paper," she said. "I understand," John said. Liz turned to John as he stopped in front of her apartment complex. "John, I want you to know that I went through your old police file. I wasn't trying to pry, but I needed to know what kind of person you were or who you were. Judging by your record, you were an uncompromising cop who didn't put up with anyone's bickering," she said. "But what I saw tonight was something else," she said. "I was very impressed with your composure. It wasn't easy to see your wife and daughter with a man who betrayed you." "No, I haven't," John said. "But I'm hoping to build a relationship with my daughter." Liz nodded. "I understand. She's very pretty and very much like you. Look, if you don't mind, I'd like to make it up to you. How do you like country and western?" she asked. "I like it," John said. "Okay," she said, smiling. "I know a place you can take me to in a week, Friday, if you're up for it. They serve cold beer and the best burgers in town. And they have dancing. You have a pair of jeans and cowboy boots, right?" "I think I can scare some people by then," he said. "If you don't mind teaching me how to dance. I've been sleeping for the last 10 years, you know." "Pick me up at, say, 6:30? She asked. John smiled. "It's a date," he said. He got out of the car, opened the door for Liz, and walked her to her apartment. She opened the door, then turned and kissed him on the cheek. "I'll see you in a week, Cowboy Friday," she said before leaving for the house. "Sleep well." When she closed the door, John felt like a high school kid who had just had his first date. He practically ran and jumped as he headed to his car with a smile on his face. He drove home and immediately turned on the evening news. It took some time, but the local news networks showed snippets of the night's event. Several candidates for statewide office met with the press tonight to introduce themselves, the newscaster said. Attorney Robert Wilson was questioned about his relationship with his brother, slain police officer Avery Wilson, and the officer's widow, who is now his wife. The video shows a very nervous and agitated Robert fending off the questions he is asked. John smiled. It had not been a good night for Robert. At one point, Wilson was accused of having an affair with his brother's wife, who had received divorce papers less than a month before the tragic events, the announcer added. Wilson denied the accusation, stating that he loved his brother. His phone rang when the report was over. When he picked it up, he noticed it was Jenny calling. "Hello, Princess," he said, picking up the phone. "Hi, Daddy," she said. "Who was that pretty girl with you tonight?" "Her name is Liz. She's a reporter." "I take it you approve of her?" asked John. "Absolutely," Jenny said. "Well, I have a real date with her in a week Friday, John said. Good for you, Jenny said. By the way, Mom and Robert are about to explode. They're beyond pissed off about the questions they asked him. They've been on the phone with reporters since they got home. I don't know what you did, but you sure got under his skin. John laughed. Yeah, it doesn't look like he's having a good time, John said. I'm just glad I was able to get so close to them without being recognized. How are you holding up? I'm fine, Jenny said. Listen, I gotta go. I have school tomorrow, but I'll be in touch. Love you. I love you too, Princess, he said. Be careful. They ended the conversation, but John's phone rang again. This time it was Ben. Hey, buddy, Ben said. Saw Robert on the evening news. He didn't look too good there. Liz really got him on the defensive. Yes, it is, John said. I think your idea of going to the media was a good one. Any news from your side? We have some interesting video from their home, and we've logged a few calls from reporters, Ben said. There was another call from your father, and he wasn't at all happy about the way Robert handled the situation. I'm not surprised, John said. Jenny told me they're pissed. Well, I've got a couple things to do here, so I'll get back to you later, Ben said. I think his performance has gotten the attention of his supporters, if you know what I mean. John knew exactly what Ben meant, and he knew Robert wouldn't like it either. For the rest of the week, John did the same thing he'd done before, sending notes and phone calls, harassing Robert and Lydia, hoping to push them to a resolution. He also spent some time buying new jeans and cowboy boots for his date with Liz. One day, Jenny had some free time after school and went with him. I guess someone will get lucky, she told her father as he showed her his new boots. He laughed. Do you really think Liz would settle for an old man like me? He asked her. Old? Please, Jenny said. You're in great shape and damn handsome. She'll go crazy if she doesn't fall in love with you. You're a great catch. I'm glad you think so, Princess, he said. How are you holding up? I'm doing fine, she said. Robert's left me alone since this whole thing started. He and Mom, on the other hand, aren't doing too well. All they do is fight and argue. I think it's time we stepped up our game a little, John said. I'll talk to Ben and Liz and see what they think. Jenny nodded her head. You're probably right, Daddy, she said. They're awfully nervous about something. I wonder if it's time to bring up your problems with Robert. Would that suit you? He asked. Jenny thought for a moment before answering. I've never been comfortable with it, but I know at some point I'm going to have to come to terms with it, she said. Would you mind if I mention this to Liz and ask her to discuss it with you? He asked. Yeah, I guess so, she replied nervously. I trust you, Dad. Do what you think is right, okay? Just don't do anything stupid. Okay, sweetheart, John said. His heart ached for her, and he wanted so badly to punish Robert for what he had done to his little girl. After Jenny went home, he got a call from Liz. Hi, John, she said when he answered. I just wanted to let you know that our tech people analyzed the video you gave me and said they're both legit. I checked it out with my editor, and he's interested to see what I can come up with. Do you have any more videos or information you can share with me? Yes, I do, John said. Would you like to meet for lunch or something? There's another aspect I haven't shared with you yet, and it's a very delicate one. Yes, of course, Liz said. Can we meet in about an hour? I'll text you the address. Sounds good, John said. I just need to run home and grab my laptop. Okay, Liz said. I'll see you then. After getting the address, John went home, grabbed his laptop, and went to meet Liz. She chose a nice bistro with outdoor seating, and John spotted her right away. She smiled as he took the seat across from her. It's good to see you again, he said. You too, cowboy, she said. What you got for me? Well, first of all, it's a problem with Jenny, my daughter, he said. She knows who I am, by the way, and we're spending time together to reacquaint ourselves. She's a wonderful girl. It's good that you're starting to recognize her again, Liz said. What's going on with her? She told me that Robert molested her, he said. Liz stared at him shocked. Oh my God, she said. Did she call 911 or do anything? Yes, she says she called 911 twice, but her mother managed to get out of it with lies, he said. According to Jenny, they threatened her if she called 911 again. We have to get her out of there, Liz said. John nodded his head. But she's over 18 now, and she's almost out of high school, John said. She's going to UCLA in the fall and plans to stay there. Right now, though, she's holed up at home. We've got their whole house wired for audio and video, and we'll catch her if anything happens, but I'm torn. Part of me wants to get her out now, but if I do, I'll put her and myself in more danger. These people are playing for survival, and they won't have any trouble ending everything once. I have a second bedroom, Liz said. She can stay with me if she wants. Would you like me to talk to her? Do you mind? Asked John. I think she needs to talk to another woman, someone who can understand her point of view. Liz nodded. I'd like to talk to her. Would you mind arranging that? The sooner the better, Liz said. John nodded his head and pulled out his cell phone. How about now, if I can arrange it? He asked. That would be great, she said. John called his daughter, and she picked up after the second ring. Hi, Daddy, she said. Hi, Princess. Would you mind meeting me and Liz right now? He asked. Wow, she said. Where are you located? John gave her the address. Yeah, I'm not very far from him, she said. I just finished a self-defense class and I can be there in 15 minutes. Okay, we'll wait for you, John said. We're sitting outside in the backyard. Finished talking, he looked at Liz. She'll be here in 15 minutes. Is that okay? He asked. Sure, Liz said. It would be nice to have another woman in the house for a while. Oh? Asked John. Yes, she said. My daughter lived with me after my divorce. My ex couldn't keep her. He left and she stayed. Then she was ruined by a drunk driver. She was only 16 at the time. I'm sorry to hear that, John said. I didn't realize you had children. Yes, you are. That's why I know how you feel right now. I've thought about it a couple times, he said. Don't do anything stupid, she told him. You have a daughter who needs a father, and I have to admit that I kind of like you too. She smiled. What me? He asked. I'm an old man. She shook her head. Hardly, she said. I bet you're no more than 2 or 3 years older than me. No way, he said. I'm 47. You can't be more than 35? She smiled. Thanks for the compliment, she said. I'm actually 44, but don't tell anyone, okay? Your secret is safe with me, he told her. Just remember, John Smith, you can rip Robert's head off, and God knows you have every right to do so. But there's an old saying about not arguing with someone who buys ink piece by piece, she said. Do what you have to do, but don't cross the line. Thanks for the reminder, he said. By the way, did you remember to bring more videos? She asked. Yes, it is, he said, pulling out his laptop. It's all pretty visual, by the way. He copied the files onto a flash drive and handed it to her. Use whatever you want. She took the flash drive from him. Thank you, she said. At that moment, Jenny joined them at the table. John stood up and motioned for her to sit down. He introduced the two women. I saw you at dinner the other night, Jenny said. I like the way you nailed Robert. Thank you, Liz said. She looked at John. Do you want to take a walk, Daddy? So Jenny and I can talk to the girls for a while? John held up his hands and stood up. I'll leave you two alone, he said. He kissed Jenny on the cheek and looked at Liz. Thank you, he said. Give us about half an hour, okay? Asked Liz. Got it, he said. I'll be back in half an hour. John left and shopped for another half hour before returning to the bistro and joining the two girls. They laughed and joked like old friends. The vigilante warrior returns, Liz said with a smile. Okay, Dad, here's the deal. Jenny is coming over to my place tonight, and she's going to stay with me until school starts at UCLA. She can stay with me as long as she wants, but there is one condition. I'll pay her way, John said. I don't expect you to support her. That wouldn't be right. Liz shook her head. Thank you, I appreciate that, but that's not what I meant. Starting tomorrow, we both expect you to come over and have dinner with us as often as possible. Preferably every night if you can, she said. And spend as many weekends with us as possible. Both women looked at him with smiles on their faces. Okay, he said. That's actually 2 conditions, but I'll take it. Deal. Jenny hugged John, and Liz smiled. "Thank you, Daddy," she said. "I love you so much." "I love you too, Princess," John said, tears threatening to roll down his face. Sitting back down, Liz held out her hand. "Let me look at your phone for a while, Jenny," she said. "I want to make sure that the surveillance they set up is off." Jenny handed Liz her phone, and John watched the older woman's fingers run across the screen. Soon she handed the phone back to Jenny. "Here. I turned off your GPS and deleted the phone finder app. I didn't see anything else. I also entered my phone number so you can call me if you need to," she said. "What are you going to tell your mom?" asked John. "Nothing, really," said Jenny. "Just that I'll be staying with a friend for a while. I'm over 18, so there's nothing she can do to stop me." She looked at Liz and her father, and wondered what life would be like with the two of them. "Thank you both for everything." She looked at Liz. "I'll see you tonight, okay?" Liz nodded her head. "I'll see you around," she said. "You have the key I gave you, don't you?" "Right here," Jenny said before walking away. "Bye. I can't tell you how much this means to me," John said after Jenny left. "Especially since we just met." Liz took his hand. "My intuition is usually right, John," she said. "And right now, my intuition is telling me to trust you. You've been hurt very badly, and some part of me wants to help you. And who knows what will come of it." John nodded his head in understanding. "But remember what I told you before. Do what you have to do with Robert and Lydia, but don't cross the line." "I understand," he said. Liz took his hand and looked at him intently. "Promise me," she said. "I promise," John told her. She nodded her head. "I'll keep you posted. Well, I have to go. I have to get ready to receive a new guest," she said. "I'll also see what I can find out about the 911 calls. If Jenny called, there's probably a recording. I'll let you know what I find, okay?" "Okay, sounds good, Liz," John said. After Liz left, John got a call from Ben. "What's up, Ben?" he said, picking up the phone. "Got a few minutes?" asked Ben. John answered in the affirmative. "I need you to come in and check something out. A very interesting phone call came in." "I'll be right there," John said, and hung up. After paying the bill, he left the bistro and headed for Ben's office. Once there, he went straight into Ben's office. Ben looked up from his computer. "John, I want you to hear this," he said, unfolding the laptop. John sat down and looked at the screen. Ben had recorded video as well as audio of the conversation and apparently was able to synchronize the two. In the video, Robert sits in his office and answers the phone. "Wilson," he said. "Bobby!" exclaimed the man on the other end of the wire. "Tony," Robert said. "Haven't heard from him in a while. What's up, buddy?" Bobby, what kind of crap am I reading about your campaign, huh?" said a man with a distinctive New York accent. "I don't know what you mean, Tony," Robert said. "Some reporter from the Times slipped me some old shit out of the blue." "I thought we had taken care of your brother's problem a long time ago," Tony said. "Me too," Robert said. "Look, Bobby, Mario's not too happy right now. You know how he feels about loose ends, right? You gotta get this shit under control," Tony said. "We've got tons of money for your campaign, and we can't afford to have you screw it up." "I understand, Tony," Robert said. "Maybe I should take care of that reporter from the Times." "Are you going to beat up some reporter for doing her job?" asked Tony. "What the fuck are you? You know everyone who has a blog writes about it. Are you going to punish every blogger on the fucking planet? Are you stupid? Listen, Tony, tell Mario I'll meet with that reporter and see if we can't tone it down a bit, okay? The newspapers will write what they want, you know that," Robert said. "I'll tell him, but you better handle this shit. You understand me?" asked Tony. "You know how Mario believes in thoroughness. You catch my drift?" "I'll take care of it, Tony. No problem," Robert said, clearly nervous. "Make sure of that, Bobby," Tony warned, "because next time there won't be a call. Got it?" "Got it, Tony. I'll take care of it," Robert said. The call ended, and Robert's face turned white. He leaned back in his chair and picked up his glass when the video ended. Ben looked at John. "Looks like his supporters back east aren't too thrilled with him right now," John said. Robert looked like he was about to pass out. "It's a lot worse than you think," Ben said. "I think the man Tony was talking about, Mario, is none other than Mario da Silva, one of the most notorious crime bosses in the country, if not the most notorious. I've heard that he's trying to get people elected all over the country to help him with his various projects, which are just a front for their criminal activities. Do you think we should let them take care of Robert and Sylvia? Asked John. I think if we're careful and feed the media enough to get them interested in Robert's activities and his background, they might just take care of them for us, he said. This De Silva is a criminal of the highest order, but he's generally thought of as a very loyal and dedicated family man. Isn't that the De Silva that the feds were looking for when I was stripped of my soul? Asked John. Why not turn it over to the feds? Yeah, he was, Ben said. Personally, I'm not sure the feds can find their own assholes now. The way they screwed up 9 or 10 years ago doesn't inspire confidence in me. I wouldn't be surprised if De Silva had someone embedded in the FBI at the time. Why don't we go through all the old videotapes we have and see if there's any mention of Mario or his buddies? Suggested John. I think you're onto something, Ben said. If they really had ties to De Silva, they'd certainly be talking about it. Hell, they've openly discussed the mission to strip you of your soul. Let's start there, shall we? Of course, John said. By the way, how's Liz doing? Asked Ben. It looks divine, John said. We have a date soon, and Jenny's going to stay with her, at least until she starts at UCLA. Ben smiled. All right, he said. Liz is a good woman, and she'll do the right thing. Just don't screw it up with her. I'm curious, John said. Why didn't you go after Liz? I would if it weren't for the fact that it's illegal to marry sisters in California, Ben said. She's my sister. The guy she was married to was a crook who couldn't hold his own. She went through hell when her daughter was hit by a car. You take good care of her, you hear? John smiled. Count on it, my friend, he said. John left and headed home, confident that things were finally starting to get better. The next day, he went to Liz's apartment for dinner, anticipating a night out with the girls. When he knocked, the door was opened by Jenny, dressed in shorts and a t-shirt. Liz looked good too. She was wearing jean shorts too. He looked at her shapely legs and felt a familiar feeling. Have a seat, Liz said, setting the lasagna down. John's mouth watered when he smelled the food. Liz insisted they say a prayer before eating and asked John to thank them, which he did. For the first time in 10 years, he felt at home. John ate 2 servings of lasagna, as well as the green beans that Liz had made. The girls smiled as they watched him eat. It was the first home-cooked meal he'd had in 10 years, and he savored every bite. Finally calming down, he leaned back in his chair and looked at Liz. That was the best lasagna I think I've ever had, he said. Thank you so much, Liz. You're welcome, cowboy, she said. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I think we'll even have enough left over for tomorrow, if you're interested. Definitely yes, he said. He turned to Jenny. Have you heard from Mom or Robert? He asked. Yes, she called me earlier and wanted to know where I was going to live. I just told her I was staying with a friend, she said. She wasn't too happy about it, but I told her that I'm 18 now, and I can stay wherever I want. I guess she won't bother me anymore. John nodded his head. Okay. Any news on your end, Liz? He asked. Yeah, as a matter of fact. I did a little digging and was able to get Jenny's 911 call records, she said. I listened to them and looked at the home visit records. Jenny was right. Somehow Lydia and Robert managed to convince them that nothing had happened. She looked at Jenny, who was uncomfortable with the subject. I think Jenny and I should discuss this further tonight. Is that okay with you? She asked Jenny. Yes, I think so, she said. Okay, Liz said. What about you? She asked, looking at John. We have an interesting recording of a conversation between Robert and a crony of some gangster back east. We believe Mario De Silva is behind Robert's campaign, and he's not too happy with the way things are going, John said. Isn't De Silva the person the FBI thought your father was involved with? Asked Liz. I think so, John said. Ben and I are going through every videotape we have to find any mention of De Silva or anyone in his organization. I've spent the better part of a day on it, but I haven't found anything yet. You do know there's software that can do that, right? Asked Liz. John shook his head. No, I don't. Remember, I've been out of the loop for a long time. Do you have something like that in your paper? He asked. Liz laughed. I have something similar at home, she says. I use it all the time to transcribe audio to text. It's not 100% foolproof, and I usually have to go back to the output to correct mistakes, but it's a lot faster than trying to type while I'm listening. How much are we talking about? There's probably hundreds of hours of video, John said. Bring it in, and I'll get to work, she said. I can help with that if you don't mind, Jenny said. John and Liz agreed. Only if homework is done first, John said. Yes, Daddy, Jenny said, smiling. Speaking of which, I've got some studying to do, so if you don't mind, I'll get started. Okay, honey, John said. Jenny stood up, kissed her father and Liz on the cheek, and headed to her room. Liz waited until she closed the door before she spoke. Your daughter is a wonderful girl, Liz said. I agree, she is, John said. I think she'll make a great lawyer someday, Liz added. I think you're right, John said. He got up and helped Liz clear the table, rinsing the dishes before putting them in the dishwasher. Liz looked like she was about to cry. Are you okay? He asked, taking her in his arms. It's just been so long since I've had a man in the house, she said. He hugged her, and tears rolled down her cheeks. It's been a long time for me too, he said. Liz kissed him on the lips and poured them each a glass of wine. They sat down on her couch and continued their conversation. And then what? She asked. Your brother and I will keep digging and see what we can find. If my hunch is correct, De Silva will take care of Robert for us, he said. So you know Ben is my brother? She asked. Yeah, he just informed me of that, John said. I probably should have told you sooner, but I wanted to get to know you better first, Liz said. I owe your brother a debt I can never repay, John said. He was the one who looked out for me when all this started 10 years ago. I understand, Liz said. He helped me a lot too. I couldn't have handled the divorce without him. Changing the subject, do you think De Silva could have taken your brother's soul? I don't know, John said. I know he's feared for a reason. At the very least, he could ruin Robert, and maybe even my father. I'll do what I can, she said. My editor has given me the green light to pursue Robert, but I have to be careful. I don't want it to look like a vendetta, and I certainly don't want to put anything out there that could open the paper up to a lawsuit. Can we use videotapes from 10 years ago? Asked John. Maybe, Liz said. We can't print the videos in the newspaper, of course, but we can use them on the website and print screenshots from them. I'll have to be very careful about how they're presented. Let me discuss this with my editor first. I'll do that tomorrow, but I think we have to prepare for it with some of the other things we have. All right, John said. If your editor agrees to this, I think it will end Robert's career. He glanced at his watch. I think I should say good night to my daughter and head home. Thank you for a lovely dinner. Liz wrapped her arms around John and kissed him. Maybe someday you'll stay and have dessert, she said. It would be my pleasure, he said. They broke the embrace when Jenny entered the room. Okay, you two, Jenny said. I swear I can't take you anywhere. John got up and kissed Liz goodnight, then hugged his daughter. Good night, princess, he said. I'll see you tomorrow night, okay? Okay, Daddy, she said. Sleep well. The next day, John continued his campaign of texting and calling Robert and Lydia, which he knew was pissing them off even more. He copied all the videos he had onto DVDs for Liz and Jenny, which took up most of his day. He hadn't realized how many incriminating videos he had of them until he tried to put them together in chronological order. That night at dinner, he handed the discs to Liz, who couldn't believe the volume of what he'd given her. I talked to the editor today and he wants me to tackle the infidelity topic first, and then maybe use that as a transition to other material, Liz said. You've already provided me with plenty of evidence, and if Robert threatens to sue, we'll bury it with everything we've got. Sounds good, John said. When is it going to happen? Read tomorrow's paper. I have a feeling the shit is going to hit the fan, she said. John smiled. I can't wait, he said. Of course, the news of Robert and Lydia's infidelity was front-page news, and all the morning shows were talking about Liz's article. A Los Angeles Times article accuses State Senate candidate Robert Wilson of having an affair with the wife of his brother, slain police officer Avery Wilson, the newscaster said. According to the article, Video obtained by the newspaper shows the officer's wife engaging in a relationship with both Robert and his father, current Superior Court Judge Daniel Wilson. We can't show that video here, of course, but the screenshots published by the newspaper show all three of them in an unfavorable light. Eyewitness News and other publications have been given a viewing of the video, and we can confirm that it does show the relationship of all three. The article also states that the divorce papers filed by Officer Wilson name Robert and Daniel Wilson and allege that his wife Lydia was in an adulterous relationship with the two men. We have contacted Judge Wilson but have not yet received a response. Robert Wilson has previously denied having such a relationship, and attempts to contact Mr. and Mrs. Wilson have been unsuccessful. According to the article, the videos also contained references to a crime syndicate on the East Coast. At the time of the events, Wilson's firm was under investigation for ties to organized crime. Federal authorities said they have not been able to definitively establish the firm's ties to the mafia. Officer Wilson was rendered soulless in his home just days after serving his wife with divorce papers, the newscaster said. We have also been told that additional information about this shooting may come to light in the next few days. Stay tuned. Overjoyed, John opened the newspaper. He didn't usually read the paper, but this article he had to read. It was black and white, with blurry pictures from the videotape. The article was quite long and detailed everything in detail. It also talked about ties to the mob and hinted that the shooting may have been planned. He was jumping for joy when the phone rang. Smith, he said, picking up the phone. Did you read the article? Asked Liz. Just finished it. It was great, he said. I'm glad you enjoyed it, she said. I'm getting flooded with calls right now. Everyone wants to talk about the article, so dinner might be a little late tonight. No problem, he said. I'll go over to Jenny's and we'll make you dinner tonight, if that's okay with you. That's more than okay, she said. Bye, see you tonight. After he hung up, the phone rang again, but from a number labeled private. He inquired who was calling him and took the call. Smith, he said. Good morning, Mr. Smith, said a man with a heavy New York accent. John recognized him as Tony, the man Robert had spoken to earlier. Who is it? Asked John. What do you want? Listen carefully, Mr. Smith, the man said. In the next few minutes, a black sedan will pull up to your apartment complex. 2 men will come to your door. They have been assigned to escort you to a meeting with my boss. You have nothing to fear if you follow their instructions exactly. Am I understood correctly? All clear, John said. The call ended, and John called Ben to let him know what had just happened. I don't think you're in any danger, Ben said. But just in case, turn on the phone finder app like I showed you, and I'll keep an eye on you. Call me as soon as you can. I think De Silva's men are getting ready to deal with Wilson. Do as they say, and you'll be fine. John followed Ben's advice, and as soon as he turned on the app, he saw a large black sedan pull up to the apartment complex. A moment later, there was a knock at his door. When he opened it, he saw 2 very large men in suits and sunglasses. He also noticed their pistols in shoulder holsters under their jackets. Come with us, Mr. Smith, one of them said. John nodded and followed them to the car. They put a blindfold on him before helping him into the back seat and searched him for weapons. They found his cell phone and took it away. The door closed and he heard the men get into the front seat. He decided to be calm and quiet while they drove. He mentally counted the seconds, noting the turns, hoping to figure out where he was going. After about 45 minutes, he felt the car stop. The men got out of the car and opened his door. One of the men held his hand as they moved away from the car. He heard a metal door open, and he was escorted inside. After the door closed, the men removed the blindfold from his eyes. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness of the room, he saw a man of medium build approaching him. The man held out his hand, and John took it. Crucial moment. Chapter 4. Mr. Smith, I'm so glad you could join us, the man said with a smile. My name is Mario De Silva. Perhaps you have heard of me. Please come with me. John followed him as he entered another room. There, chained to the wall, were Robert, Lydia, and Dan. They were sitting on the cold concrete floor and looked genuinely frightened. Their feet were chained to brackets in the concrete, and their hands were shackled above their heads. There are some people here I think you'd like to see for the last time, the man said. I'm sure you know Mr. and Mrs. Robert Wilson, as well as Superior Court Judge Dan Wilson." "Yes, I know them," John said. They all looked at him, their eyes pleading for mercy. "Avery?" asked Robert weakly. "Is it really you?" "No," John said. "Avery is dead. You took his soul 10 years ago. Remember? You and that fool," he added, looking at Lydia, who had tears in her eyes. "In fact, all three of you plotted it. I guess your chickens have finally come home, haven't they?" John looked at one of Mario's men and noticed that he was carrying a stun gun. He had electrodes that had to be placed against his skin for it to work. He looked at Mario. "May I?" he asked, pointing to the stun gun. Mario looked at the man, then at the stun gun. He smiled and gestured for the man to hand it over. John took the stun gun in his hand and looked back at Robert. He leaned over and whispered in Robert's ear, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's for molesting Jenny, you worthless piece of shit," he said, as he put the electrodes on Robert and pulled the trigger. John stood up and looked down at Robert. "And this is for taking your brother's wife," he said. He leaned over and turned to Robert. "I just want to know one thing," he said to Robert. "Why?" Robert stared at him for a moment before answering, "Because it was fun," he said weakly. John stood up and looked at Robert for a while. Then he punched Robert again, and one more time. "You know, you're right," John said. "This is fun." He kicked Robert one more time. "Are you having a lot of fun right now, asshole? Eh?" He looked at Lydia and shook his head. "I was always taught never to hit a woman," he said. "Avery loved you with all his heart, and how did you repay him? Spending evenings with his brother and father, and then you conspired. And then you let that asshole touch your daughter. What kind of fucking monster are you? You're not worth the effort." He motioned to Dan. "And you swore to uphold the law, but you don't even know what the fucking law is, do you? You're an even bigger piece of shit than Robert, you know that?" He stepped back and punched Dan too. "To hell with you. To hell with all of you." He stood up and handed the stun gun back to Mario's man, thanking him. Then he turned back to Mario. "Is there anything else, Mr. Da Silva?" he asked. Mario shook his head. "No," he said. "I just thought you might want to say goodbye." John looked at the three men standing in front of him. "Goodbye," he said, "and have a good journey." He looked at Mario before continuing. "You know, I thought about it myself once, but I promised I wouldn't cross that line, and I'm a man of my word." Mario nodded his head, dismissing John. "I know that about you, Officer Wilson," he said quietly. John looked at him in surprise. "Oh yes, I know who you are. I also know that your daughter is attending UCLA this fall. She wants to be a prosecutor," John said. "And I'm sure she'll be a good one," Mario said. "Don't worry, John. I have no problem with honest prosecutors doing their job. I have attorneys who handle these matters for me. I do, however, have a problem with people who deceive me, as these three will soon find out. Like you, I too am a man of my word. I am also a devoted family man. You have been given a gift that most of us will never receive, a true second chance at life. So please take care of your daughter, be a good man to Miss Johnson, and live a long, happy, and healthy life." He held out his hand to John, and he accepted it. "Vaya con Dios, my friend," Mario said. "Thank you," John said. "Same to you, Mr. Da Silva." Mario smiled. "Please call me Mario," he said. "All my friends do." John nodded his head. "Vaya con Dios, Mario," he said. Mario smiled, nodding his head. He ordered the two men to take John home. They obeyed, blindfolded him again, and led him to the car. A little less than an hour later, the blindfold was removed, and John was given his cell phone. One of the men handed John a large bottle of brandy. "In gratitude to Mr. Da Silva," said one of the men. "Please convey my thanks to Mr. Da Silva," John said. The men nodded their heads and left. John made sure the sedan drove away and sat down at his desk. He pulled out his cell phone and noticed his hand was shaking. He grabbed a cup of coffee and went out to the balcony to light a cigarette, hoping to calm his nerves. After he calmed down a little, he called Ben. "John, are you okay?" asked Ben. "I lost all the signals from your phone." Yeah, I'm fine, John said. He remembered his encounter with Mario and the three crooks who had ruined his life. That explains a lot, Ben said. I've lost all the signals from their house. It's like they jammed all the electronic signals before they grabbed Robert and Lydia. It's probably a good thing you managed to get Jenny out of there in time. I agree, John said. They finished talking, and John finished his cigarette, looking out at the balcony. Around 5 o'clock that evening, he walked up to Liz's apartment and knocked on the door. Jenny answered and let him in. He hugged his daughter tightly. Daddy, are you okay? She asked. Yeah, I'm just so happy to see you, he said. It's good to see you too, Jenny said. Liz called, said she's probably going to be late. What do you think about just calling her over for pizza? I think pizza is good, John said. I brought a deck of cards. Want to see if you can beat the old man at spades? Jenny smiled, remembering the card games she'd played with her father when she was younger. I've had a lot of practice since the last time we played, she said. He pulled out the cards. Well, let's see what you've got, he said. Taking a pad and pencil, they sat down at the table and played spades until Liz called John. He picked up the phone and noticed that it was 9 o'clock, and they had been playing for over 3 hours. Hey, John, Liz said when he answered. Have you seen the news? No, Jenny is beating the pants off me in spades, John said. What's going on? Better turn on the news, she said. Looks like De Silva took care of Robert and Lydia. I'm sorry, but I've been doing interviews all night, and I'm going to be stuck here for at least a couple more hours covering this story. Can you handle dinner yourself? No problem, John said. We were thinking of calling for pizza. Pizza is fine. Sorry, John. I'll be home as soon as I can, she said. I understand. We'll be here, John said. Thank you for letting us know. He ended the conversation, then turned on the TV, searched the local news, and found the channel that was covering the story. Just got a report on Eyewitness News, the announcer said. Tonight, the home of State Senate candidate Robert Wilson burned to the ground. Firefighters recovered the bodies of 3 people, 1 woman and 2 men. It's unclear what caused the fire, but authorities say they are investigating and haven't ruled out foul play. Mr. Wilson and his wife Lydia are believed to be among the dead. Stay tuned to Eyewitness News for more developments. Jenny gasped and fainted in tears when the news came. John was hurting too, but more because of his daughter than anything else. He hugged her and she sobbed, wetting his shirt with her tears. His phone rang, and he sat Jenny back down before answering it, seeing that Ben was calling. Did you see the news? Asked Ben. Yes, it is, John said. You didn't know this was going to happen? He asked. No, it wasn't, John said. Were they alive the last time you saw them? Asked Ben. Yes, it was, John said. I made a promise to Liz and I kept it. Okay, I believe you, Ben said. I'll let you know if I hear anything. Take care of Liz and Jenny. I will, John said, and ended the call. Jenny looked at him as he put the phone back down. Did you have anything to do with it? Asked Jenny through her tears. No, you didn't, John said. I made a promise to Liz. I admit I wanted them to experience pain, and there was a time when I would have stripped them of their souls for what they did to you and me. But no, I had nothing to do with that. Do you swear to me on a stack of Bibles? She asked. If necessary, he said. Have I ever lied to you? No, it wasn't, she said. He hugged her as she mourned for her mother. John's phone rang again, and he saw that it was Liz calling. Hi, Liz, he said. How are you? John, please tell me you didn't know anything about this, she said. No, I didn't know that, he said. Okay, she said. I had to let the police know where Jenny is, and they'll be here soon. No doubt they'll have questions. I'll be out of here soon and we can talk when I get home, okay? All right, John said. How's Jenny? Asked Liz. She's upset, naturally, but I think she'll be fine, he said. Okay, keep an eye on her and I'll see you soon, she said. That sounds good. I'll go and order a pizza, John said. They said goodbye and ended the conversation. John called the local Domino's Pizza and ordered 2 large pizzas for them. He sat with Jenny until he heard a knock on the door. He opened the door and saw 2 large LAPD officers, one of whom was Sergeant Taggart, an officer he had worked with 10 years ago. Is Miss Jennifer Wilson here? The sergeant asked. Yes, John said. Please come in." The officers entered, and Taggart looked at him intently. "By the way, who are you?" asked Taggart. "Smith. John Smith," he said. "I'm a friend of Miss Johnson's and I'm looking after Jenny." "Do you have ID?" asked Taggart. John nodded his head and pulled out his driver's license. Taggart looked at it carefully and held it back out. "Can you explain your whereabouts since about 5 o'clock this evening?" he asked. "Yes," said John. "I left the house about 5 o'clock and came here at once. I've been here with Miss Wilson ever since." He looked at the table where the cards still lay. "She blew me to smithereens tonight." Taggart looked at the table and nodded his head, then looked at John again. "You remind me of a man I once worked with a long time ago," Taggart said. "You know the Wilsons?" "No, I don't," John said. Taggart nodded his head and turned to Jenny. "Miss Wilson?" he asked Jenny. Jenny looked up at him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I hate to tell you this, but your mother, father, and grandfather died tonight in a fire in their home," he said. "Robert wasn't my father," she said. "He was my uncle when my mother married him." "I see," Taggart said. "Could you tell us why you're here?" Before answering, she looked at John. "My uncle molested me," she said. "Miss Johnson found out about it and invited me to stay here until I go to college in the fall." Taggart nodded his head in sympathy. "Have you reported this to anyone?" he asked. "Yes, it is," she said. "Twice, but no one did anything about it, and my mother threatened me if I reported it again." Taggart looked shocked. He'd met Lydia years ago when she'd been married to her first husband, and he found it hard to believe she could have allowed such a thing to happen to her daughter. "I'm very sorry, Miss Wilson, both for your loss and for what happened to you," he said. Jenny looked up at him, her eyes suddenly hard. Taggart recognized that look, as he had seen it on her father several times before. "I'm not sorry they're no longer with us," Jenny said angrily. "I'm glad they are. They conspired to take my father's soul, and then she let that bastard touch me." Taggart listened to her as she unloaded. "I understand, Miss Wilson. I knew your father, and he was a hell of a cop," he said, holding out his business card to her. "If there's anything I can do to help, please call me. There's also a grief counselor's number here. I suggest you use it." He stood up and turned to face John. "Mr. Smith, if you care about this girl, I strongly suggest you see a psychologist soon," he said, before walking away. The pizza arrived shortly after the officers left, and Liz walked in a few minutes later. Jenny was still lying on the couch, wiping her eyes. Liz hugged her and went into the kitchen where John was cutting pizza. She could tell he had something on his mind. After he cut the pizza and placed it on plates, he turned to Liz and Jenny. "We need to talk," he said. He put the pizza on the table and invited them to join him. "What's going on, John?" asked Liz. "First of all, I promise you both that I had absolutely nothing to do with what happened tonight." "I made you a promise, Liz, and I'm a man of my word," he said. "I was contacted early this morning by De Silva's men. They took me somewhere, I don't know where, blindfolded me and drove me around in circles, and I saw them, Lydia and Robert and Dan. I talked to them. Strong words. I hit Robert, but I swear to you, they were both alive when I left, and I had no idea this was going to happen. I thought De Silva's men would mess with them a little, but nothing more than that." The girls looked at John before they spoke. "I believe you, John," Liz said, "and I appreciate your honesty tonight." Jenny hugged her father. "I believe you too, Daddy," she said. John covered his eyes slightly before he spoke. Liz noticed this and gave him a questioning look. "There was a time when I wanted to take their souls for what they did to me, and for what they did to you, Jenny," he said, and tears rolled down his cheek. "Then I met you again, Jenny, and I met you, Liz, and I realized that I was no longer the same man I was 10 years ago. That man could have easily ended it all without even breaking a sweat, but that's not me anymore. What De Silva told me suddenly made sense." "Have you spoken to De Silva himself?" asked Liz. John nodded his head. "Yes, that's right," John said. "He said I'd been given a special gift, a chance at a new life. A life with you, Liz, and with you, Jenny. I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago, Liz. I'm sorry." Liz hugged him as he cried. "No, you're not the same person, and you don't need to apologize," she said. You're a better person than you were 10 years ago." After they hugged and cried for a while, Liz looked at John. "You know, it's been a long day, and it's getting late. Why don't you stay with us tonight?" she asked. "Yeah, I can snuggle on the couch," he said. Liz and Jenny shook their heads. "I don't want to hear about it," Liz said. "If it's okay with your daughter, I'd like you to stay with me." Jenny smiled. "Are you sure?" asked John. "Oh, yes, my love. There's plenty of room in my bed," she said. "But remember, I'm strictly a one lover and expect the same from my man." John smiled. "It's a deal," he said, kissing her. He looked at Jenny. "Are you okay with that?" "Oh, yes, Daddy," she said. "I'm more than okay with that." They cuddled some more, finished their pizza, and went to bed. After a night of sleep, John woke up with Liz. "I could get used to this," he thought with a smile. Epilogue. 6 months later, John and Liz were married. Ben was John's best man, and Jenny was Liz's maid of honor. Life was getting better. An autopsy revealed that Robert, Lydia, and Dan left this world from asphyxiation. Firefighters determined that the fire was caused by an electrical short circuit that quickly spread through the old wooden house, aided by piles of papers and old law books Robert and Lydia had collected over the years. Jenny attended UCLA and divided her time between college and her father's apartment. Although John didn't have to get a job, he went into business with Ben, working as a private investigator. However, there was one loose end he had to take care of. One day, Jenny called to tell him that his mother, Barbara, was in the hospital with an incurable form of illness, complicated by bouts of dementia. According to the doctors, the old lady didn't have long to live. John took Jenny and Liz with him to visit her one last time. As he entered the hospital room, he noticed his mother's condition. She slowly opened her eyes and looked at John. Tears were streaming down her cheek. "Avery," she asked weakly, "is it really you?" He sat down next to her. She scrutinized his face. "Oh my God, Avery, I'm so sorry for everything. Will you ever be able to forgive me?" He took her frail figure in his arms and hugged her. "My name is John Smith now," he whispered. "But yes, it really is me. And yes, I forgive you," he added, and tears ran down his face. She started sobbing as he wrapped his arms around her. They held each other for a few minutes until she began to tire. He laid her down on the floor and smiled at her. "Thank you, John," she said. "Now I can leave this world in peace." Exhausted, she fell asleep. They left the room while she slept. She left us a few weeks later, but in that time she managed to change her will, dividing her considerable estate equally between John and Jenny. John organized her funeral and buried her next to her husband. Looking at the 4 graves of his former family, John realized that De Silva was right. He had indeed been given a special gift, and he was going to make the best use of his new life. And so we come to the end of this story, full of drama, revenge, and redemption. Our hero went through hell to achieve justice. He faced horrific truths about his loved ones, but found the strength to forgive and let go of the past. This story is not just about revenge, it is about personal transformation, about the strength of the spirit, and about the importance of being able to forgive. Our hero, having gone through the fire of trials, became a different person. He found love, family, and the meaning of life. The ending of this story leaves us with a feeling of deep satisfaction. Justice has prevailed, and our heroes have found long-awaited happiness. We hope that this story made you think about the importance of forgiveness, about the strength of the human spirit, and that even in the darkest corners of our souls, there can be light. Thank you for being with us throughout this journey. I hope that my voiceover is worthy of 2 of your mouse clicks, namely a subscription and a like. Also, don't forget that the full version of the story is available on our Patreon. There you will find even more details and emotions. See you soon.